Well, greetings, everyone. My name is Monty, and I am a recovered alcoholic. Now, let me explain that to you, please, because some of you, especially those of you in the faith community, are probably going, hey, don't call yourself an alcoholic. All things have passed away. All things are new. Well, let me ask you a question. Why are you still wearing glasses? Let me ask you a question. Why do you still get the flu now and then? Let me ask you a question. Why do you still have a bad attitude when it comes to that guy or that gal? I'll tell you why. It's because your spirit is new, but matters of the flesh are not necessarily all brand new. I am an alcoholic. It is a medical term. It simply means that I am allergic to booze. I put booze in my body, and my body does not process it the same way as the average temperate drinker. My pancreas doesn't deal with alcohol the same way. My brain chemistry doesn't react to alcohol the same way. When I put alcohol in my body, I do alcoholic stupid stuff. And it gets me into severe trouble. How'd this all start? Well, being a fat little chubby kid in school, or being the skinny, really tall kid in school, or the shy kid in school, or the extrovert in school, what'll all those get you? Negative attention. And I was no different. I was a little chubby kid in school. I wasn't too good at sports or any of that kind of stuff. And so I got picked on a lot. There was some abuse brought on by older boys that happened early on in junior high, middle school. And I watched as my father would come home from a very stressful job, and he would pour himself a small glass of Christian Brothers brandy. It was made by Christians, right? It can't be all that bad. That's what I was thinking. And I'd watch as my dad would relax, and the worries of the day would subside, and he would mellow. My dad seemed to be a pretty functional guy. He was a very responsible man, city manager of Petaluma, California for 20 years. He had a good career. He had a wonderful wife and my mom. My family, they raised me just as well as they could. I wasn't raised on the toilet backwards. I wasn't raised in a dysfunctional home to the degree that many are today. But I saw my father discover a solution to the stress of his day, and I thought, why not me? Why not me? So one day, prior to a school dance, which I was scared to death to go to, but I needed to go there so badly because it was so important that I make friends in my life and people like me and approve me of me and accept me. But I was scared to death to go. I snuck into my dad's liquor cabinet and I poured myself a huge glass of Christian Brothers brandy, and I filled it to the top, and I immediately drank it down, no hesitation. I was drinking alcoholically from the very beginning. I didn't realize it then. And after I drank that first one, I poured myself a second one and then a third one, and I was off to that school dance, and let me tell you, I was the center of attention. I danced like I'd never danced before. I was in the middle of a circle of people that I would think were my friends, which did not become my friends, but became my mockers. But they clapped for me louder than anyone ever clapped. They cheered my name louder than anybody had ever cheered my name. And for a few hours, I was up on a pedestal, and I was all that. Alcohol had done for me what I could not do for myself. What it would do to me in the next several decades was devastating. And so for the next several weeks, and weeks turned into months, and months into years, alcohol became my friend. It was my solution. It wasn't my problem. And it would go with me everywhere. It would hitch a ride on the inside pocket of my three-piece suit when I was going to work, or my back pocket when I was going to scout camp, or I would hide it in my sock if I was going to church. It went with me everywhere because without it, I was nothing. You see, I had become so emotionally dependent on alcohol that it turned into a physical dependency and then into an actual, what we call alcoholism. My body had become dependent on the alcohol, and to not put it in my body would make me very sick. It came a point where alcohol started to bite me in the rear end. And so I needed to change it up. And I watched as other people that I come to know start adding different substances to the portfolio of drugs and narcotics. So I started to experiment there. And while doing that, I started to drop weight. Hey, that's great. I started looking better. Alcohol became secondary. And methamphetamine became primary. And for 18 years, I lived with a needle in my arm and occasionally with a bottle in my mouth. I had girlfriends, boyfriends. I had fake friends. I had real friends. Maybe one. His name I'll tell you here in a minute. But my dysfunction grew and grew and grew, and I began to act in ways that I never thought I would. People in my life, they couldn't figure it out. My parents were scared to death. People in the church wanted to heal me and separate me from my dysfunction. People in college were concerned. I turned my back on those who would help me. I neglected those who cared for me. And I refused assistance from those who were qualified to help. All because I could not separate myself from these substances. I had no more power to stop using and drinking than I had the ability to turn myself into a rock. My problem was not a lack of education. My problem was not that I didn't have talents and abilities. My problem was not that I wasn't smart. My problem was I was powerless. I had become 100% powerless over these substances in my life. So my solution wasn't to quit drinking. My solution wasn't to quit using. My solution wasn't, to sit around a group of people and talk about my day and drink bad coffee. That wasn't my solution. My solution was I needed a power. I needed a power greater than myself to help me solve my problem. And although I knew of this power, that's that one friend I told you about a minute ago, I ignored his advice. I ignored his guidance. I ignored his love. And I tried and attempted with all my might to walk further and further and further away from him. But no matter how many times I walked away, no matter how far I walked, he was always there. Until it got so bad that I walked into the doors of a faith-based program who, with all their heart and desire to help, really, really wanted to help. The only thing they really offered me was a place that was safe to where there wasn't any alcohol or narcotics. And I was there for a year. But they didn't really offer me any kind of recovery or tools on how to recover other than the gospel. But it was always the gospel, the gospel, the gospel. And that was great. But don't you know, my problem wasn't that I needed the gospel. I already had the gospel. I turned my will and my life over to the care of God on my terms back in 1971. I'd been to Bible college. I had a head full of knowledge. So knowledge of the scriptures was not going to save me. And I didn't know how to apply and implement that stuff until I left that treatment program and actually walked into the doors of a 12-step fellowship where many well-meaning Christians, by the way, suggested I never darken those doors because don't you know they'll take your God away from you and make you call him higher power. That never happened, by the way. Although there have been some who would criticize me for my belief in Jesus Christ, when it got down to it, nobody backed me against the corner and told me that I had to change my belief system. In fact, I received more love and acceptance there than I had in any circle of friends. And there I began to work a program of recovery based on the 12 steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. Step one, I had to admit that I was powerless. Why would I seek a power if I couldn't admit I was powerless? I kind of wish that the life being unmanageable part had come first in that step. I admit that my life's unmanageable and that I'm powerless over alcohol or narcotics or whatever. Because guess what? My life was unmanageable before I ever touched that glass of Christian Brothers brandy. My life was unmanageable before I ever picked up a cigarette. My life was unmanageable before I ever started cutting class. My life was unmanageable from the day I was born, because I was born with a sin nature. I was born with a nature to miss the mark. I was born with a nature that would feed my character defects and my shortcomings. I was born that way. And then later came the substances. But if I cannot, admit my powerlessness, you can't fix what you don't acknowledge. Then there would be no reprieve from this. So that was step one. Step two, I had to come to believe in a power greater than myself could restore me. Oh, but Monty, you said you were a Christian. Yeah. I knew that God existed. I knew who God was, but did I believe it? No, I really didn't. It was okay for you, but it's not going to work for me. So I had to come to a point where I had to go from knowing it to literally believing it. And I had to turn my will and my life in step three over to the care of God as I continued in my understanding of Him. Not as I created Him out of my own understanding. That's hogwash. When I create God out of my understanding, I become the creator. And now I'm right back where I started. I'm in deep weeds. So I had to turn my will and my life over to the care of this God, regardless of my lack of understanding. But as I continued in my understanding. And how did I continue in my understanding of God? By going on to the next phase of my development, by step 4, immediately after doing step 3. And I made a searching and fearless moral inventory of myself. I had to take a record of the stock and trade in my life. I had to find out what was fueling this behavior. What was the trauma? What was the hurts? What was the misery that was pushing me to push others far away from me? And once I was able to do that, I had to turn to a place where I could confess those things. I had to confess them to God, not because God didn't know, but because I needed to do that. I needed to confess it to myself so I could walk out of denial. And I needed to confess it to another person, because that is where the healing begins, my friends. Salvation is free. God is a free gift, but healing comes from confession one to another. And once that happened, in step 5, I was able to move to step 6, where I was entirely ready to have God remove all these defects that I had discovered while doing step 4 and confessing in step 5. God, will you take them from me? And step 7, I humbly on my knees ask Him to remove my shortcomings, those very defects. God, I can't remove them. If I could have, I would have. But I can't. So I need you. I need to stop leaning on my own understanding and start acknowledging you in all my ways so you can light my path, so I know which way to walk. So my dependence is no longer on other people and what they think about Monty, but my dependence is on you, Lord. And I know what you think about me. You love me. When you look at me through the eyes of your Son, and you see no spot or wrinkle. My position in you is secure. My condition's a mess, but my position is secure. I didn't earn it by my behavior, and I can't lose it by my behavior. But my behavior will either grant me serenity and peace or misery. So I had to continue in my program. I had to make a list of all the people that I had harmed, and I had to become willing to make amends to each and every one of them. It isn't an apology, it's an amendment. To make amends means to change something. I am regretfully ashamed of how I treated you and the way you trusted me and how I broke that trust. And I'm here to say I need to make it right. How can I make it right? And in the process of making it right, whether I owe you money or whether I owe you amends, is that I am working on my life, and I'm going to try my darndest never to do that again. And I don't make an amends to clear my conscience. I make an amends because you deserve the amends. And as a result, I get to experience that peace. And then I make that amends. I make that amends, except when to do so would injure you, the people in my life. I never make the amends at the cost of your serenity. And I follow through, and I do that. And then we move into steps 10, 11, and 12. These are what some call the maintenance steps. I disagree. You can maintain a 57 Chevy and never drive it. You got to take it out on the road. You got to run that thing. 10, 11, and 12 are the continuing to grow steps. And by the way, I don't ever have to do a step 4 again as long as I'm living in step 10. Continue to take personal inventory. When I'm wrong, I promptly admit it. That's step 10. When I'm wrong, I promptly admit it. Maybe not promptly to you right away. Maybe you're a processor. But I promptly admit it to myself, to God, and to someone else. If I live in step 10, I never have to do a 4-step inventory anymore, because that's my lifestyle. On step 11, I seek through prayer and meditation to improve upon my conscious contact with my Creator, because it's an ongoing thing all the time. I don't graduate from this. I'm growing, I'm moving. And this wonderful relationship between me and my Heavenly Father is growing and developing. And once I understand that and I grasp that, it's so exciting, and I can't keep it to myself. So then I move into step 12, where I'm practicing all these principles. What principles? Each one of the spiritual disciplines in those 12 steps, I'm practicing them in all of my affairs, at work, at home, and play. And I'm offering what I've been given to you open-handedly. It's something I don't take lightly. I had to come to a place when I was in those 12-step rooms, not doing this work, and I had to ask myself, what in the heck are you doing in a 12-step program if you're not willing to do the 12 steps? A light came on. Wow. And probably one of the most valuable things I learned while applying and implementing these steps was this. I am not going to stay sober by the power in the steps. I am not going to stay sober by the power in the meetings. I'm not going to stay sober by the power of my pastor. I'm not going to stay sober by the immense power and love of my wife or my kids. I am only going to stay sober by a power greater than all of those. And that power is God. Now, all those other things, those are tools. But that's all they are, tools. They're not the house. They're the tools that help build the house. But they're not the house. He's the house. He's my shelter from the storm. And today I live free. Today I can boast of my weaknesses, as Paul said. That to keep him from being boastful, he was given a thorn in the flesh, a messenger from the devil, allowed by his Heavenly Father. And he asked 3 times. There's a couple of numbers in the Bible that refer to consistency. The number 7 and the number 3. He asked 3 times, probably many more times than that. How many times have you asked to have your uncomfortable situation removed? I asked over and over and over and over again. And God said to me the same thing he said to Paul, son, my grace is sufficient for you, because when you are weak, then you are strong. Therefore, you should be boasting evermore of your weakness. Hello, my name is Monty. I'm a recovered alcoholic. And I am not embarrassed to boast of it. I wave that flag proudly, because it is in that weakness that God is strong in my life. Where are you in this? Are you sitting around in meetings, drinking bad coffee, whining about your day? Or are you picking up the literature and actually applying and implementing the principles, the spiritual disciplines in these 12 steps? Something to think about. I love you. I care about you. That's my story. I'm sticking to it. Thanks for letting me share.